Hello and welcome. My name is Trevor, and you are watching a short video here on Reverb. This is going to be a really quick crash course on Reverb. And first, I'm going to start off by talking about a few things that are just general things that we should know about Reverb. Now, Reverb is a spectral processor. And in that spectral processor, for instance, if you have RVerb, you could have different types of reverb. You could have halls, rooms, chambers. It can emulate church, plates. You could even have it set so that it's reversed or gated and various other settings such as that. And with each one of these reverbs, the program processes the audio a little different. Halls will sound more like rooms. It will sound more like a big acoustic space. Rooms will sound more like the room that I'm sitting in now. A chamber will sound like an echo chamber. A church will sound like a big open church with a long reverb time, and plates will sound more metallic lights like plates do. So now that we know basically that a reverb plugin such as RVerb here can emulate many different spaces, we must understand the basic reverb times that come into play. So when you have reverb times, you're going to look at a graph such as this if you don't have them memorized, and you'll know that recording studios typically have a smaller reverb time because they're more dead, because you don't want to capture all that verb. Otherwise your sound going in will be very cluttered and will be hard to mix. Whereas orchestras have longer reverb times, and churches are somewhere in between there, as you can see right here. And you could look up various reverb times online, but your ideal reverb time you can read will be about 1 second for vocals, and if you want to emulate a church, it's going to be 2, and then you could have longer reverb times where you see fit. So it's really all personal discretion and up to your own personal choice. So with that in mind, I'm not going to dive too deep into that because that's something that you could go in and look up on your own. This is just a short 5-minute video to touch on reverb. So with that in mind, we're going to dive in. Now, a couple things that I've learned is that, for example, a reverb processor will offer qualities such as this. You'll have reverb dampening, where you can raise the amount of low end that happens in reverb or the amount of high. And for an acoustic guitar, I'm going to try and brighten it up. So just because I've already EQ'd my acoustic guitar, but adding in more high end just sounds fake and ends up being very tinny. So what I've done is I have set up a send here called Verb, and I will just go in to my mixing window, and I have already sent my acoustic guitars to a master acoustic guitar bus so that they're summed together here. And then I send that to my reverb, and let's take a listen here as I slowly bring in that reverb. Now, as you could hear there, when I kick that in, it kind of sounds a little brighter. I'll kick it in and out real quick here. Tone down the size so it doesn't sound as fake. Okay, so I'm going to kick it in and out here real quick. And I have also brought down the size here, because it was sounding really fake when it was at 100, just because the space was too big and it made the acoustic guitar sound really fake and you could hear all the artifacts. So here's my reverb in. Out. In. If you heard, it got a little brighter there as I kicked it in and out. Okay, so To wrap up here, I'm going to go over a few of the settings that I did not go over. In particular, I'm going to talk about pre-delay right here. Pre-delay essentially delays the time that you hear that first reflection in your reverb. So if I kick up the reverb a lot, it's going to separate my initial dry tone from my wet reverb sound. And this is nice for when you have snares and vocals to really separate out your verb sound from your dry sound, because often those two will conflict and muddy up the mix. Now, size is just one of those weird properties that programmers have added in so that you get a sense of, oh, this is the size of the room, and it affects some back-end stuff on the sound, because you are loading up, in this instance, a hall, but this then affects the size of the hall, which affects the reverb and how it is processed. So if you have a higher one, it's going to sound like a larger room. Smaller, it sounds like a smaller room. Diffusion is another one of those properties, so it's kind of like having wood in a room or carpet in a room. And yeah, now most delays you're going to have it set as linear, otherwise it doesn't sound like a natural space. And your early reflections, those are your first reflections that you hear, and in this case I have set it up so that I have 100% wet mix, since I am blending it myself through a send. Now that was real quick, however I haven't had a lot of time here in this video just because I wanted to touch on reverb real quick. So let's listen to this acoustic guitar here, and let's manipulate the pre-delay a little. See, I can barely hear that there. I'm going to kick it up really high so you can really hear the effect. Here, there's almost in there playing. You hear that on that tail? That's where it's really clear to hear it when you pause it. And you can see here, that right here is the gap between the initial sound and your reverb sound. So that also gives you a graphical representation, which is nice. Now in some plugins you won't see that, however this is a Waves plugin, so it is not stock. Now, I hope that this was relatively informative. I know that I kind of blew through some real quick concepts. A couple things that I mentioned that aren't mentioned in a lot of other videos is this reverb dampening. That's important because when you think of acoustic spaces, you don't hear an overly crazy amount of bass unless you're in a concert hall. Now, if you wanted to emulate a concert hall, you would crank up the low end, have a lower high end response on it, and let's hear how that sounds. That sounds a little more natural like that, and like you're playing in a bigger hall, which is nice. However, in this instance, I wanted to add a little more treble to my guitar so that it cut through and it was nice and bright. And one important thing we're going to want to do is you always want to have an EQ. A lot of reverbs offer a little EQ in here, but I typically also slam in a little bit of EQ 7-band here just so I can either knock out or boost my trebles up a little here after I process it. And this is really nice because it also allows you then to do whatever you want with your settings. So I've been Trevor, and I hope that this is an informative video for you. Just subscribe to my page if you want to see some more, or don't. It's up to you. Thank you very much for watching.